40, long time. Build every day, build the vibe. With ECCB for a lifetime. ECCB 40, long time. Celebrating 40, long time. Build every day, build the vibes. 40, long time. Build every day, build the vibes. With ECCB for a lifetime. Everything intact, we making impact. With the cash, digital currency. Quick to react, so we could relax. And that is fact. Reliable. The ECCB protects you and me. In each and every ECCU country. Strong polymer currency and solar powered energy. Oh yeah. ECCB 40. Long time. Whoa. Celebrating 40. Long time. Whoa. Feel the rhythm, feel the vibes. 40, long time. Feel every day, feel the vibes. With the ECCB for a lifetime. Always coming through for us, a central bank to trust. 40 with no fuss, can't wait for 40 plus. Education, 40 plus. Wealth creation, 40 plus. Teach transformation, 40 plus. The ECCB protects you and me. In each and every ECCU country. Regional brilliance and vigilance, oh yeah. ECCB 40, long time. Oh. Celebrating 40, long time. Oh, feel the rhythm, feel the vibes. 40, long time. Feel every day, feel the vibes. With ECCB for a lifetime. ECCB, our financial guide. Side by side, we go match with pride. ECCB, our financial guide. Side by side, we go match with pride.
Tourism is and remains an important facet of economic development in the Eastern Caribbean Currency Union. The tourism industry has provided jobs to the people of the region, sustained our countries, and lifted our societies. Even more so, for Grenada, Carriacou, and the Petite Martinique, tourism is considered a lifeblood. But tourism is more than sun, sea, and sand. Tourism may also derive from sources such as sports, health, or even the military. With a growing and thriving healthcare sector, and with globalization, persons may choose to travel across borders to receive medical treatment, hence medical tourism. This desire to travel for healthcare is often motivated by lower costs, avoidance of long wait times, and access to better health services. Proponents argue that these activities can boost economic growth and have other positive impacts for developing countries. Skeptics, however, argue that these developments are achieved at the expense of the local healthcare system, not to mention ethical concerns. Welcome to the ECCB's 40th Anniversary Lecture Series, the Grenada edition. Listen as our panelists examine and evaluate the prerequisites and prospects for medical tourism in Grenada, Carriacou, and Petite Martinique.
the Grenada Room at the Radisson Resort in St. George's, Grenada. It is the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank's 40th anniversary lecture series, the Grenada edition. At this time, we invite the audience in the room to stand for the national anthem of Grenada and the invocation. I'd like to invite Father Marcin Rumik to move the invocation.
Both riches and honor come from you, and you rule over all. And in your hand is power and might, and it lies in your hand to make great and to strengthen everyone. The first book of Chronicles, chapter 29, verse 12. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. God our Father, giver of life, the rock on which this nation was founded, you, the true source of our cherished rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. We all gathered here to celebrate the 40th anniversary of the establishment of the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank. We thank you for the mission you have blessed this institution with, that is, to be stewards of the financial and material wealth of the people. Give to this institution and to the people responsible for it the prudence, and allow them to safeguard the assets entrusted to them. Help them maximize and spread the possible benefits of economic growth with impeccable integrity for the welfare of all of us. Bless them with the graces to provide service and excellence at all times in whatever they do. Make them channels to multiply the bountiful abundance you provide. Enable them to sustain and enrich this beautiful world that you have given us as our home. We do pray through your Son, our Lord Jesus Christ. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit.
Thank you very much, Father Marcin. Can we remain standing for the national anthem of Grenada? Thank you very much. Can our in-person audience please take your seats? Governor General Dame Cecile Lagrenard, Her Excellency, GCMG, OBE, PhD. The Honorable Dennis Cornwall, Minister of Finance and the ECCB Monetary Council member. Members of Parliament throughout the Eastern Caribbean Currency Union. Dr. Decima Williams, President of the Senate. Governor, Deputy Governor, and officials of the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank. senior government officials, representatives from the financial sector, other specially invited guests, viewers, welcome. It is our pleasure to have you here, those of you joining us across the region of the ECCB Currency Union, and those of you who have joined us on Grenada Broadcasting Network, GBN Television, and all the other online streams. It is our pleasure to move the welcome officially from the ECCB, the country manager for ECCB Grenada, Mrs. Linda Felix Berkeley.
Thank you, Brenda. Good evening, Her Excellency, Dame Sister Lagrenard, our Mr. Cornwell, Honorable Mr. Cornwell, Father Marcin, and everyone, our distinguished guests from the financial sector and beyond. It is indeed a pleasure, it's a delight to be here. As we all know, few years back, when the British colony, the British government released the islands, and each island were on their own. Barbados, Jamaica, Guyana, Trinidad decided to go on their own. And we, the small islands, knew we could not make it individually. So we came together and we formed Eastern Caribbean Currency Union. We started with the Monetary Authority. And look at us today. The Eastern Caribbean Central Bank is one of the strongest financial institutions, regulate our financial sector, make sure that everything is good. And this is what we celebrate, 40 years of being together, 8 countries, Anguilla, Antigua, Dominica, Grenada, St. Vincent, St. Lucia. That's us. So we are proud to celebrate 40 years, and that's why we are here today, to speak about it, to comment on it, and to relish it. So, and I just want to thank this gentleman and this young lady who decided to assist us in what we are discussing this evening. We have Richard Duncan, OBE, we have Angus Friday, and we have the lovely Brenda. And just to comment that Richard and I and Angus, we were all in the Institute for Further Education. So that's something we always, laugh at and so on. So to now invite Brenda to come take over. Yeah.
Thank you so very much, Mrs. Berkeley. It is now our pleasure to move opening remarks from the ECCB, the ECCB's Deputy Governor, Dr. Valda F. Henry.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Grenada edition, the 4th in the ECCB at 40 lecture series, commemorating and celebrating our 40th anniversary under the theme Medical Tourism, Prerequisites and Prospects. I want to especially welcome our panelists, Dr. Angus Friday and Mr. Richard Duncan, and our moderator, Ms. Brenda Baptiste. The global medical tourism market in 2020 was estimated at US $54 billion, and it is expected to almost quadruple by 2027 to US $207 billion. The Honorable Prime Minister of Grenada, Duncan Mitchell, opines, people don't just travel for traveling's sake. They want an experience. They want to learn. And they want to experience something. And one of that something is quality medical care with a vocation. Prime Minister Mitchell also indicated that one of the goals of his government is to make Grenada the healthcare capital of the OECS. This evening, our panelists will explore the topic, looking at the opportunities and prerequisites to make Grenada the healthcare capital of the OECS, attracting visitors from around the world, and obtaining a share of the more than US $54 billion market. Get ready to be enlightened. Welcome, welcome, welcome.
Thank you so much, Dr. Henry. The Eastern Caribbean Central Bank, ECCB at 40, a year of reflection, celebration, and implementation, 1983 through 2023. This is the Grenada edition of the ECCB's 40th anniversary lecture series. Our charge here in St. George's is the exploration of medical tourism in a sustainable context under the theme, Prerequisites and Prospects, Blue, Orange, and Green Economy. Ladies and gentlemen, this lecture will focus on the prerequisites and prospects for medical tourism, which refers to travel for the purpose of receiving healthcare services. The panel will also explore the intersection of the blue, green, and orange economies as they discuss the importance of sustainable tourism. And now, let's meet our distinguished panel, minted right here in Grenada, pure Grenada, the spice of the Caribbean. Richard W. Duncan. Richard W. Duncan, OBE, is a retired banker and former managing director of Grenada Cooperative Bank Limited. Richard holds a BSc in Economics and Accounting from UWI and a Master's in Public Administration from Carleton University. He is a fellow chartered professional accountant and fellow certified general accountant and an associate of the Institute of Canadian Bankers. He is an accredited director and a fellow of the Chartered Governance Institute of Canada. An economist and accountant, he joined the Grenada Cooperative Bank Limited in 1996 as its financial manager. He previously worked in the Grenada Public Service in the areas of public policy analysis, debt management, public finance, and public sector investment programming. Richard has made meaningful contributions to the discourse on public and private finance, banking, and bank regulation in the OECS. As a presenter, writer, and discussant at several regional and sub-regional conferences and seminars. In 2008, he was honored as a distinguished graduate of the University of the West Indies in commemoration of its 60th anniversary for his contribution to financial services. And in 2022, he accepted the award of Officer of the British Empire, OBE, from Queen Elizabeth II for his services to banking in Grenada. He serves on several boards. His current directorships include Chairman of the Grenada Citizenship by Investment Committee, CBI, Director of Caribbean Financial Services Corporation, and Eastern Caribbean Partial Credit Guarantee Corporation. He gives back to the community at home and abroad as a Rotarian. Being a past president, he is chairman of the UWI Open Campus Finance Committee and is a member of the OECS Nomination Committee of the Anthony N. Sabga Caribbean Awards for Excellence. He is married to Petal with one daughter. Ladies and gentlemen, Richard W. Duncan.
Thank you very much, Brenda. Governor General, Her Excellency Dame Cecile Lagrenade, CGMG, OBE, PhD, Honorable Dennis Cornwall, Minister of Finance and ECCB Monetary Council member, Members of Parliament throughout the Eastern Caribbean Currency Union, Dr. Decima Williams, President of the Senate, Deputy Governor of the ECCB and officials of the ECCB, senior government officials, representatives of the financial sector, other specially invited guests, viewers in cyberspace. Good evening to everyone. Let me start off by expressing my appreciation to the ECCB for the opportunity to participate in these activities and to deliver this lecture. I also want to show my appreciation to Mrs. Linda Felix Berkeley and Mrs. Valine Street Victor for the support along the way and the guidance, and of course my fellow presenter, Dr. Friday, and moderator, Brenda Batiste. Based on the requirement not to plagiarize, I would start off from the beginning by acknowledging some of my sources. R.S. Neil Lunt, Johnson Roy, Valerie A. Cooks, Richard Smith et al., Matt McDonald et al., and S. D'Souza. With that out of the way, what I will do is to provide you with some definitions. We will look at the industry in terms of its scope, its spread, its depth. We'll also take a peek, very small peek, at its intersection, green, orange, and blue economy. And then we will try to establish the prerequisites, those things that are necessary for the development of a profitable, economically viable, sustainable medical tourism industry. We'll then attempt to determine what are Grenada's ambitions in the area of medical tourism. And of course, we'll ask ourselves, given the prospects, or what are the prospects of us successfully embarking and pursuing our ambitions in that area. So first of all, the orange economy is defined in one way as being a production model where goods and services have intellectual value because they are the product of the ideas and expertise of the creators. In other words, it refers to all businesses rooted in creativity, involving things like art, culture, research, science, and technology. So that said, we can agree immediately that medical tourism, by its very nature, fits smack bang in the definition of an orange economy. But then what is medical tourism? When you look at the literature, there are several definitions out there. But for me, the key is when consumers elect to cross international borders for the express intent of seeking medical care. They leave with the intent, not that you come to the island and you fell sick and there was good health care for you. That's not medical tourism. Not that you take a vacation and as part of it, you go to a spa or you take a shower in the boiling spring. That is not medical tourism. It is when you leave your home country with the express purpose of seeking medical attention or care. The treatment may span from a full range of medical services, but most commonly it includes dental care, cosmetic surgery, elective surgery, fertility treatment, and such like. The green economy is defined as one that results in improved human well-being and social equity while significantly reducing the environmental risk and ecological sacrifices. In other words, medical tourism must not result in the crowding out of locals from affordable, accessible, quality healthcare and services. If that happens, we can conclude it is not in harmony with what is understood to be a green economy. And clearly, it must not place at risk or harm to the environment when it comes to the treatment of solid and liquid waste generated by the industry. And of course, the inputs into the medical tourism industry, the nutritional inputs, obviously, should come from high quality, reliably supplied, local, organically produced foods. So if we take that into consideration, you see clearly there's a nexus between medical tourism and agriculture, no doubt. Much talked about for decades between tourism in general and agriculture. And of course, the blue economy, most of us understand that to be the sustainable use of the ocean resources for economic growth, improved livelihood, and jobs, while preserving the health of the ocean's ecosystem. So in the context of medical tourism, we can easily argue that medical tourism must not contribute to the depletion of the fishery stock or place unmanaged pressure, again, on solid and liquid waste disposal systems, such that our beaches, bays, inlets are negatively impacted. So again, the quest is for harmony and balance between all these elements that make up the medical tourism industry. So then, what is the scale and size of the medical tourism industry? And why the new heightened interest? Because from the definition of someone leaving his or her home country with the express purpose of seeking medical care, that movement by humankind is older than the Bible. So medical tourism is not new. It existed in ancient times. So why the renewed interest? Why, the massive growth in medical tourism? When we looked at the information available, before we go into the growth or the size of it, we have seen where in 2017, you had countries that were both senders and receivers. Richie, I just want to give me the PowerPoint, thank you. All right, so it's not responding. So, for example, the USA was a major recipient of medical tours, right? But they were also senders to other countries. France were recipients, they were senders as well. Belgium. Thailand were recipients. Jordan was, Turkey, and most recently in a big way, India. And the senders remain US, France, Belgium, Kuwait, Nigeria, Netherlands, Oman, Canada, to name a few. So what we are seeing is where the movement shifted from people from the third world or the medium-sized economies and countries going to the metropole for medical treatment, where it's the reverse. They are coming now. Hence the growth and the renewed interest. Nowadays, the major recipient countries include what I call the MIS: Malaysia, India, Singapore, and Thailand. Mexico, Taiwan, Costa Rica, Dominican Republic. So as you can see, it is a cross-cutting industry. So being $1 million industry, we heard from the Deputy Governor, and different studies will give you different numbers, because admittedly, the methodology for and the system for robustly capturing this data is not quite as mature as it should be. However, one credible source pointed out that right now, we are looking at an industry that is $165.3 billion, 0.16% of global GDP. It might sound small, but it is not. It is projected to grow by a compounded annual growth rate of 12% into 2032. So we are looking at millions of people moving into these territories for medical treatment, and the main motivator by countries for encouraging medical tourism, obviously, is employment creation, foreign exchange earning, and of course, to improve your balance of payments. So medical tourism as an emerging global industry requires, therefore, a range of key stakeholders with commercial interests, which include, but is not limited to, brokers, healthcare providers, obviously, insurance providers, website providers, conferences, media services, all make up the ecosystem of the medical tourism industry. As I said before, globally, we are expecting to see $225 billion industry by 2032. Right now, we are looking at 165. However, this industry is dominated by 50 destinations. They have seen the benefit. The last 2 decades have seen the flow of medical tourism reversed, point I made earlier, whereby the major recipient countries, to repeat, Turkey, Thailand, Costa Rica, Mexico, Dominican Republic, Barbados now, Cuba, South Korea, all offer specialized services. So what are the drivers of medical tourism in the 21st century? First of all, there are some push factors. There is high medical costs in home countries, USA, France, right? All those sending countries that we listed earlier. There's also long waiting period for service in these countries, believe it or not. And of course, I think another push factor might be that some services on the reproductive care side is illegal, is the word, right? In some jurisdictions, so you could see where there will be interest in those countries that can do legally these procedures that are otherwise outlawed in home countries. And then we have the pull factors, of course, where there's low cost of treatment. There's also the new enabling infrastructure in the receiving countries. This includes affordable, accessible travel. One might say, no, that is a pre-COVID, idea. But I think we are returning to pre-pandemic levels in terms of the movements of people across the world. And we could speak to Grenada itself. I mean, JetBlue comes in not half full, but full most of the times, and likewise when it goes back out. Not that it is affordable, but people can afford it, if that makes sense. People who want to travel will find the money to travel. Also, readily available information over the internet, and the deliberate state intervention to build out the physical and non-physical infrastructure for medical tourism. So the internet is what it is, but governments have put in place mechanisms to draw and to build out that particular industry. So therefore the question arises, what are the things that must occur first and foremost, or even simultaneously, to build out a competitive medical tourism sector? In other words, what are the necessary and sufficient conditions, as the economists will say, for an economically viable and profitable medical tourism sector? We can put the question a third way. What are the things without which there can be no competitive medical tourism sector? And yet still, for those of us who remember a Latin phrase or two, we say sine qua non, without which. Is that pronunciation right? Sine qua non. Yeah? A little Latin. From our study of project management, and from reviewing the experiences of successful jurisdictions in this industry, the building out of a viable, profitable sector requires, obviously, a solid foundation. There are therefore 10 prerequisites. I'll just list them very quickly. First, there must be a well-defined national strategy with clear rules for government and government agencies and, of course, the private sector and public-private partnerships. A predictable and enforceable medical legal framework speaking to the quality of care, redress, liability, and litigation, because things that can go wrong do go wrong. Smooth functioning mechanism for relevant stakeholder collaboration, deliberate and purpose-driven training and development in terms of international standards. You need to train the professionals that you want in the industry. Of course, quality professionals with international experience, accredited medical institutions, especially those that will play a significant role in service delivery, a la the hospitals. Quality information, advertising and marketing, trained, certified, and regulated brokers, and travel insurance. If the aforelisted elements are not in place to buttress an embryonic, emerging, and thriving medical tourism industry, the efforts would falter and become uncompetitive and eventually fail. Given the foregoing, the next logical question is, can Grenada potentially successfully pursue the build-out of an economically viable and financially profitable medical tourism sector? In other words, what are the prospects? What are the likelihood, or what is the likelihood of this happening? The answer for me is very simple. It depends on us. It really depends on us. First, we must believe, then we must conceive, and finally, set out to achieve. And here I take my favorite line from Sir Eric Matthew Gary, who advocated, the difficult we must do right away, because the impossible will take a little while. The question is, therefore, what are Grenada's ambitions in the area of medical tourism? Given our ambitions, what is our pathway to success? And how far along are we in pursuing medical tourism as a viable economic sector? How do we go about establishing what our ambitions are? I believe that you have political parties that are contending to tell the people what they believe they are understood as to the aspirations of the people. And that goes through a machinery, a mixing, and they end up with budgets and plans and what have you not. So a search, a word search of the party's manifesto would be helpful. A word search of the National Sustainable Development Plan will also be helpful. And a word search of the budget speech would be helpful. So a word search of the NDC Manifesto 2022 found no mention of medical tourism. Likewise, a search of the NP Manifesto 2022 drew a blank on medical tourism. However, a similar search on the National Sustainable Development Plan 2020 to 2035 found a solitary mention in brackets. In other words, it was not a declarative statement. In fact, it said this: the National Export Strategy 2017 to 2021 identifies our priority sectors as agriculture, fisheries, health and wellness, tourism and hospitality industries, open bracket, medical tourism, agri-tourism, sports, and ecotourism. That is the sum total. Not declarative, but two words in a bracket with some other words. We can safely conclude, therefore, that currently, Grenada has no ambition to pursue medical tourism as defined in the literature and multilateral institutions, such as the World Bank, the IMF, and the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development, OECD. However, it is well established that Grenada is deeply committed to enhancing the delivery of healthcare through, inter alia, the construction of a new hospital. This is clearly stated in the National Sustainable Development Plan 2020 to 2035. at pages Roman numeral 24, it reads, relocate the General Hospital in the medium to long term in an area that is more tranquil, therapeutic, and easily accessible. So relocate is taken by me to mean construct a new hospital because it cannot be moved. But the word construct, build, is just relocate. It also says establish a teaching hospital to provide a wider range of specialized services to the Grenadian population, again at page 24. Moreover, our ambition for a new hospital is asserted in the 2023 budget, in which the Honorable Deacon Mitchell stated, we have made a commitment to construct a new modern public hospital with teaching facilities as the centerpiece of development of the education, health, and wellness sector. The economic and health benefits from such a project have never been in doubt. Preliminary studies have already confirmed the potential significant impact on the economy. To demonstrate our commitment in this regard, we will launch this project next year and complete the necessary preliminaries to commence the project. An amount of $5 million has been budgeted for phase 1 of the new hospital project next year. That's at page 15. So it is in a context that we find the possibility, in my view, of medical tourism coming to play in our aspirations. But not in the 2023 budget. We have to go back 10 years to 2012. In that year, the International Finance Corporation, IFC, which is a private sector arm of the World Bank Group, funded a study called Grenada Replacement Hospital, PPP, Transaction, Structure, and Report. A word search of that document, similar to the ones alluded to above, found 7 mentions of the word medical tourism. 3 are declarative and highlighted. 1, the replacement hospital is also expected to function as a teaching hospital for SGU, and I underline, have the potential to absorb future demand for medical tourism, a strategic objective of the government. Statement 2. As detailed later, we recommend that the new hospital have a complement of single rooms for private patients. We would envisage this to be 10 single rooms, 2 attached to each main ward areas, plus 4 for overseas medical tourism. 4. That's the extent of the ambition that we can glean back in 2012 for medical tourism in Grenada. Now, against this background, I posit the view that in conceptualizing the new hospital, Grenada will be much better served in the long run if the business model facilitates and integrates medical tourism as a significant component in that business model. There are several advantages to this approach. The most obvious one is medical tourism will crowd in specialists that locals will have access to. And the financial viability of the medical tourism component will result potentially in lower and more affordable access by locals. In fact, any PPP involving the delivery of healthcare on the island, medical tourism or not, must necessarily have a strong, binding, and well-supervised arrangement that allow affordable access by locals, such as having CARICOM rates, which now do exist in the hotel sector. To my mind, we are now at an inflection point, meaning that the demand for and the commitment to deliver the new hospital suggests that we can rethink the ways in which we pursue accessing and delivering healthcare. That radical rethink, for example, can be if we truly build out our primary healthcare system, it is possible to have resources freed up for hospitals or the main hospital to genuinely deliver secondary and tertiary care to our patients. That's how we'll get the billion, to my mind, the medical tourism component. But more importantly, I don't think we should look at the new hospital as singularly for the delivery of a social service to the population. When the international airport was built, it was not built for when Grenadians are going away or when Grenadians want to come back home. It was built as the gateway to Grenada's economic future. We happen to leave on it every now and again. The bulk of the people who are using the international airport are not Grenadians. That is where the viability of the airport comes from. So I'm suggesting that if we have a radical rethink, yes, you need the hospital. Yes, access is primarily for your people. But if you want a viable, to me, hospital that could contribute also to economic development and growth, you need to have that mix and to include the medical tourism there. So it's probably timely that it was not built 10 years ago or 15 years ago when medical tourism was not maybe the big thing. And other countries who have already gone that route may have missed the boat, I do not know, but I think we have an opportunity at this stage. So earlier we listed 10 prerequisites. I now assert that and hopefully prove that we have some of these in place, or we have the capacity to bring them to fruition with relative ease. But that again is if we believe, we conceive, and we plan to achieve. So the national strategies, I believe these can be built quite easily with the help of World Bank. Technical assistance from the countries that have gone before. We have excellent relations with some of those countries, including India, for example. We have a pretty decent legal framework and a pretty decent tradition in building out laws and monitoring and enforcing laws and so on. And by the way, one of the laws that we have recently passed, which is the Data Protection Bill, I don't think it should be lost on us that when you come to medical care and privacy and your data, you want to be sure there's a legal framework to protect that information. I think when the argument is made that these things are part of the bedrock and the foundation for building modern economies, this is one example where we could fit it in quite nicely. And of course, there are people in the region, in my view, who will be saying, if only we had SGU on our island. There are islands in the region with medical schools, several of them, when put together, cannot make half of SGU in terms of the student intake. So I'm saying that we have an excellent opportunity to partner with SGU. I'm also arguing that the SGU alumni is pretty large after 30-something plus years of graduations. And I think SGU is documented as the largest offshore medical school producer of doctors in the United States. I say that without fear of contradiction. I cannot quote the exact section of it, but that is one of the realities. So it seems to me that Grenada has to determine at a very high strategic level whether or not it desires to pursue medical tourism. If the answer is in the affirmative, then a high-ranking multidisciplinary interministerial task force should be charged with the mandate of defining and refining what our medical tourism offerings should look like and map out how it is these goals will be pursued and accomplished. Very early in the journey, a private sector-driven, government-funded, in the initial stages, medical tourism association should play a lead role in shaping and molding the said strategy. Globalization has spared few economic sectors in economies worldwide. Rapid digitization of commerce, information access and sharing has driven a lot of the changes. The demand for the production of and consumption of healthcare services continues to mushroom owing to the international travel, accessibility of health information online, and easy consumption of the said information. High-cost healthcare services in major advanced economies has created a global flow of patients to small, medium-sized economies where similar medical technology and expertise are employed at significantly lower costs. The treatment available range from dental, cosmetic, we mentioned already, fertility treatment. we in Grenada must not be left behind. We have to better direct our capital and develop the necessary institutional, regulatory, and legal frameworks to support all the services required to develop and sustain the sector. We can do it if we believe, conceive, and plan to achieve. Thank you very much.
Thank you so very much, Mr. Richard Duncan, our first panelist. Let's hear it for him again. I was rubbing the crown of my watch, hoping that you'll see me from the side. You're bang, spot on time. Well done. Our next panelist is Dr. Angus Friday, MD, MBA. Angus is an international island economy development specialist, helping to finance island nations by sustainably harnessing their natural assets and comparative advantages. A qualified medical doctor with an MBA, Angus represented Grenada as its ambassador to the United Nations and to the United States, Canada, Mexico, and the Organization of American States. In addition to developing the Atlantean program, he currently serves as the Blue Economy Director at the San Diego-based White Institute, where he advises governments on ocean and coastal economic strategies that support island nations in the Pacific, Atlantic, and Indian Oceans. During COVID-19, Angus served on economic advisory committees to recommendations to the government of Grenada, to provide recommendations, rather, to the government of Grenada. He also served as chairman of the parliamentary mandated Fiscal Responsibility Oversight Committee, as we commonly know, known as the FROC. While at the World Bank, he served as the bank's oceans representative, representing the institution's $1.2 billion ocean-related portfolio. In addition, he helped to raise $29.5 million from bilateral donors Denmark and Japan for island nations. Lately, he assisted Grenada in securing $30 million from the World Bank as part of the first Fiscal Resilience and Blue Growth Development Policy Credit in concessionary funding under IDA 18. Having conceived the program, he helped Jamaica's Prime Minister and Sir Richard Branson launch the Caribbean Climate Smart Accelerator in collaboration with the Inter-American Development Bank and other international entities. In his earlier entrepreneurial career, Angus founded and sold 2 medical informatics companies while living in London, and also advised Scottish regional development agencies on bioinformatics and marine science strategies. He studied at St. George's University School of Medicine and the Strathclyde Graduate Business School in Scotland. Minted in Grenada, Dr. Angus Friday.
Thank you very much for that very, very warm welcome. Excellency, Governor General Dame Cecile, Excellency Decima Williams, Minister Cromwell, former Minister of Finance Gregory Bowen, protocol having been established, we can jump right in. But let me say, first of all, start by saying a very special thank you to the ECCB for having us. If I can have up the first slide, please. And the next one. So for our conversation tonight, we'd like to touch on a few things, building on the excellent presentation that we've just had, which established what medical tourism is all about, and also talked about the blue, green, and the orange economies. And we want to start by just stepping back a little bit and thinking about some of the opportunities and challenges that we face and the strategic imperatives that come out of that, and as a result, why diversification of the economy is an imperative for wealth creation. We want to talk about medical tourism in the context of the knowledge economy. We'll see a little bit about it in terms of the OECS, and it's related to the various American medical schools that they have. We talk about some related opportunities, links to the green and blue economy, and some next steps for consideration. If I can have the next slide, please. So let's start with climate change. We have two major opportunities and threats that we face, both climate change and what is happening with digitization and artificial intelligence. With climate change, the latest IPCC report, AR6, has said that we're now at 1.1 degrees above pre-industrial levels, and that most likely by 2030 or so, we're going to hit 1.5 degrees. Dr. Williams will tell you, having been an advocate for 1.5 to stay alive at the United Nations, that the small island states really put a lot of effort in the advocacy around the importance of 1.5 degrees and not going beyond that, not getting to the 2 degrees that was talked about. Given all of this, what is being said is that we're going to need to have between $3 and $5 trillion spent per year to move and transform the global economy to a low-carbon economy as a result of that. Now, over the years, Grenada has done great things on advocacy and climate change. We even have a Grenadian now as the head of the UNFCCC. But we need to be thinking about climate change as well in terms of the opportunities around the green economy. We need to be thinking about it in terms of wealth creation for ourselves as well. If we can have the next slide, please. Digitization and artificial intelligence. This is another major challenge and opportunity that is coming up. As a result of the pandemic, in the United States and in Europe, 88% of organizations sent their workers home to work. People started working remotely. Pandemic came and went, and only about 60% of people are actively willing to come back to work. Some of them have to come back to work. But more and more, the point is this, that the world has gone digital as a result of the pandemic. We've seen it here in Grenada as well. We've been talking about digitization for many years, but as a result of the pandemic, kids had to learn from home. Everyone had to get onto the internet. And so we had this major digitization, this thrust of digitization, which happened globally and here in Grenada as well. Building on that, we now have artificial intelligence. As of November last year, an app around artificial intelligence called ChatGPT-4 became the fastest growing bit of technology ever. It went from 0 to 100 million users in 2 months. Things like WhatsApp and so took a couple of years. Mobile phones took about 16 years to get to 100 million users. So this is happening very very rapidly. Very quickly, quick show of hands, how many people actually use ChatGPT? We have a few in the room. My friends, when you go home, download ChatGPT and to understand this new artificial intelligence technology. It is frightening. As a result, as just yesterday, in fact, a whole range, over 1,000 technology leaders have basically put out a statement to global leaders saying artificial intelligence must now be a priority alongside nuclear war and pandemics in terms of human extinction possibilities. So artificial intelligence has both huge opportunity. I use it now to help me write papers, and so we get through it actually very rapidly. It gets you started. Kids are using it for their homework now, but it has some challenges as well. And if I could have the next slide. And all of this perhaps is a great backdrop for some of the key strategic imperatives outlined by the governor of the ECCB at the start of this lecture series. And that is, we need to be thinking about wealth creation, food and nutrition security, energy security, and digital transformation. And so what we're going to be talking about tonight in terms of medical tourism links with orange, blue, and green economy is going to be related to these strategic imperatives. If we can have the next slide, please. So, first of all, it's important, and we've seen this in the pandemic, we need to diversify our economy. Grenada at one point was the second largest producer of nutmegs in the world. That we've since fallen away. We need to be thinking about the core industries we have and how we build on these. The medical industry is a key area. And the previous speaker pointed out to the fact that we have SGU here in Grenada. I actually want to build on the point that he made. In fact, SGU has provided 1 in every 100 doctors practicing in the United States. It is the single largest source of doctors practicing in the United States. Now, could you imagine if, I don't know, Grenada nutmeg jelly was the single largest, if we were the single largest source of that in the United States, or chocolate? We would be looking at this, figure out how can we actually grow this. SGU, it is said, represents about 20% of our GDP. So it makes sense for us to think about SGU as an industry that can be concentrically built upon in a number of areas that we'll go into in a moment. We need to be thinking about how we link that with our coastal areas and our blue economy. What it means if we were to have a teaching hospital, for example. What does that mean for the returning diaspora? When you go to New York and so you meet people, they say, well, I want to come back, but the health care, right? People want to know that there's going to be good health care in Grenada if they are to come back. And if they did, think about all of the people bringing home a pension, $20,000 a year, $50,000 a year or more, and spending that in Grenada. Think about what that would mean for them also developing properties and so on. It'd be a huge boost to Grenada. So the idea of a medical tourism and a medical facility is actually key for that. And the idea of the retirement communities. There's now something called the golden economy. The golden economy is the fact that populations around the world, you have an aging population. And people are looking for places to go. That's why Florida, a lot of people are flocking to Florida. There's no reason why Grenada cannot capture some of that market, but it's going to be vital that we have very good healthcare services. And we're going to link this to the blue and the green economy and also talk about next steps. If we can have the next slide, please. So diversification for wealth creation. We have a tourism industry. We need to be thinking about how we build on that concentrically. So when we say diversify, we're not going to go into areas where we have no comparative advantage. We need to look at the things that we already have, things that are already working. Tourism, the spices, and so on, the medical school, and build on that. And we need to be thinking about our medical tourism in the broader context of the knowledge economy. In the knowledge economy, there's several sectors that we can be thinking about. But let's just take healthcare and education. We see the success of SGU. There's a lot more educational sectors that we can be thinking about. And so these are some of the things that, from a strategic point of view, and reimagining ourselves, not as we're going to continue to do primary production of agriculture, and so we're going to continue with services, but we need to be thinking of ourselves as a knowledge economy, because in fact, 20% of our GDP already is derived from that. The green economy as it relates to agriculture and agri-tech. Agri-tech is becoming increasingly important, and we need to be thinking about how more and more Grenadians can actually take on some of these agricultural ideas. We've had things like model farms and so in the past, but we need to have technology centers. We need to be able to have funding and finance for people in the tech sector, in the agri-tech sector, to show how monies can be made on that. In St. Lucia, you have entrepreneurs coming up with apps to link farmers to markets and so on. That's the sort of thing we're talking about. In St. Lucia, you already have people turning sargassum into fertilizer, right? That's Algas. The entrepreneur behind that has been highlighted by Forbes magazine as top 30 under 30 globally. So we need to be thinking about these things in terms of the next level and tying all of these things to technology. Also in the green economy, I want to say just a few words on renewables and electric vehicles. We don't have a lot of time for it, so I'll just say a few passing words here. It's absolutely vital that we move from the fossil fuel-based economy that we have now to one based on renewable energy. There are a lot of plans afoot in terms of geothermal, solar, wind energy, and so on. But what we find is that with solar energy, prices have come down to about 80% since 2010. And if we were to introduce a policy that would say from now on, or between now and the next 20 years, we need to transform ourselves to electric vehicles, because it'll take some time. But you see, investments in energy, people are looking at a long-term horizon anyway. So if we know that we're going to be going all electric vehicles, it actually becomes a lot more exciting to invest in Grenada as a renewable energy destination. And the blue economy, we'll touch on that as well. How are we doing? If we can have the next slide, please. So we talked about a lot of these things already. But I want to think a little bit now about the knowledge economy and the medical training. So we talked about the possibility of having a teaching hospital. But we need to think about a teaching hospital not only as it relates to SGU and SGU's agenda. We need to think about a nursing school as well. And there's been a lot of talk over the years about what we could be doing with nursing schools. But when we look internationally, we see that a lot of nurses serving in the United States, in the UK, and other places actually come from the Caribbean. And so similarly, using a teaching hospital for doctors, for nurses, but also for other medical technicians, we can actually build up a cadre of professionals that can go internationally, send remittances home, but also have a core cadre at home to deliver healthcare, excellent healthcare in Grenada. Medical back office and front office is also possible, but we need to see what is happening with artificial intelligence and how that's going to be impacted. So by back office, what we mean is, all the medical forms people have to fill out for the insurances in the States, and so how those things get processed. A lot of those things have been outsourced to countries around the world. But it's quite possible with artificial intelligence that many of those jobs will go away. So we need to look at this space a little bit carefully and see what we can do. But around health and wellness. So a previous speaker said, well, health and wellness, if you go to a spa, so it's not quite medical tourism, because we want to focus on the hardcore medical tourism. But there is a related role for health and wellness tourism related to things like medical herbs, chocolate therapy, geothermal treatments, and so on, because these are things that we actually have here. And related to that, also tie that into agricultural tourism. Next slide, please. So what would be some of the key developments, the core developments around this medical tourism idea? We would like to suggest that, and I think the previous speaker already spoke quite a lot about the teaching hospital. So the IFC done a huge amount of work on looking at how to actually finance through a PPP arrangement a hospital. They're actually a little bit upset with both Grenada and the World Bank when that didn't go through because they expended some money on all the studies and so on. They would actually be quite happy to restart those conversations based on some conversations I had with them just a few years ago. So this is something we need to think about. We have a Hostialic here in the crowd this evening, and his brother Ralph worked on something called a medical park idea. When we think about some of the ways of wealth creation around the world, let's think about Silicon Valley. Silicon Valley is based on the fact that you have Stanford University as a core academic institution, and around that you have a whole range of industries that have come out of that. Starting with Fairchild Semiconductor, that company then begat lots of other little companies, and they all went to Stanford University for the knowledge aspects of that. So when we think about this, we need to think about SGU, a teaching hospital, but a wider area and a set of policies that will actually encourage people to invest in related ancillary services. So going beyond things like diagnostics to actual products that you can make from in the medical space. So medical park, I think, is important in terms of how we think about where we position this, what happens in the vicinity. Health and wellness training and financing facility. A lot of existing hotels would say, well, how can we participate? So what training do we actually have for them in terms of health and wellness and showing them how to do that? And is there a financing facility that will help them to move into that? All of these things are going to help to brand Grenada as the destination for medical tourism, for healthcare. It'll make us the health center we're talking about. Now, I just want to go a little off-piste a little bit and talk about a couple of related things. And this all comes under the idea of the knowledge economy. And that is conferencing, performing arts, and performing arts. Now, we just had an amazing Orange Economy conference here in Grenada. And for those of you who saw it, I think everybody was extremely impressed with what came out of that. So what's the next step? What are we going to say next year when people come back to talk about Grenada and the Orange Economy? One of the things we could be thinking about is the scope for having a conferencing hotel that is actually linked to a performing arts center. Because you can have spaces where you know, massive theater spaces that can do conferences and can do performing arts, one by day, another by night. And I'll show you a couple of ideas for that as we get further in. Linked to wellness, medical health and wellness, we have fitness. And so we need to be thinking about a sports city as well as a key investment. And we'll see a little bit about that, and we'll talk about, and also the upgrading of the international airport. I'm not going to say much about that, but I think if we want to get a certain caliber of people coming to Grenada, when they arrive, they need to feel a sense of confidence that they've made the right decisions, and there are things that we could be doing at the airport. So some of the prerequisites, I think, to get this up and running would be site identification. The work that was done by IFC, the site that was identified is in that Calavini area. Now, is that the best place for medical tourism? Not sure. Ideally, medical tourists want to be close to the ocean. Even better if you could, be in your suite and have a view of the ocean. So we need to be thinking about the placement of this very carefully. And with the teaching hospital, obviously all the different services that can be related, surround that. National health insurance is also going to be critical. And work has already been done in terms of national health insurance. It's a difficult one. That's a difficult one, politically tricky one. But we need to find a way to make it happen because we need to have a much more predictable way of collecting money related to healthcare and ensuring that everybody has access to healthcare, when they need it. And repurposing of the existing hospital site, I'll say a few words about that as well. So making it happen, national health insurance is quite key. We have a transformation fund. We have something called CBI. We need to be thinking about how CBI, in my view, how CBI is actually helping us in terms of our development priorities, and not only the development priorities of international investors coming to build hotels and so on. CBI actually could do a lot more in terms of our core development priorities. Repurposing the existing hospital site is important. The IFC recognized it as one of the areas that you can actually use to finance the new hospital. So they put a value on the existing hospital site. I think it's about 30 million or so. And if, depending on what you want to do with that site, that can actually be used to help finance the hospital. And we need to consider the merits of an SDG bond. And I'll just say a few words very quickly about that, and I'll run through the rest of my slides in consideration of time. More and more, people are looking at financial instruments, green bonds, blue bonds, SDG bonds. That market is expected to reach 26 trillion in a couple of years. And what an SDG bond will do, I think everyone's familiar with the 17 SDGs, the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, is that you can say to investors, listen, here are the things that I'm going to do as and I'm seeking to do. I'm seeking to raise money for these things. Could be something to do with renewable energy. Could be something on education, healthcare. You come up with a list of things and say, these are the things that we're going to be doing. You can actually go out and raise money based on that. Call it an SDG bond. You get a lower interest rate if you do the things that you set out to do. If you go use the money for something else, interest rate goes up. But it's a way of actually doing a financial instrument and keeping the interest rates quite low. So I see our moderator is shifting in the chair. So I'll just okay. We'll just quickly go through these. How is all this linked to the blue economy? Back in 2016, a blue economy master plan was developed. And it looked at the coast of Grenada from Pidi Martinique all the way down to Point Celine. Asked, we have this amazing coastline. How can we better utilize this coastline in terms of economic development and in terms of jobs? One of the things identified was the idea of a teaching hospital and medical tourism. Different sites were looked at over the years. A previous group had looked at Mount Hartman. In this particular exercise, an area above BBC Beach, it's actually a flat area above BBC Beach, was considered given the proximity. But in fact, and so some ideas were developed in terms of how that could look, how you can create a campus-like area for both public and private healthcare, spin-out companies, and so forth. But in fact, when we look at Grenada and what has happened in terms of the movement of people over time, we have urbanization happening in Grenada. More and more people have left the countryside to come to St. George's. And within St. George's and in the south, people are actually moving east. And this is some work that we did with New York University as part of the Climate Smart City. And we looked at satellite photographs over the years, and you could see the increased urbanization in the south and also how it moved more and more into St. David's. So when thinking about what would be the ideal placement for this, if I can have the next slide, please. I've just realized I've been going through slides and not asking for the next slide. Next slide. Next slide. Next slide. So this is how urbanization has happened in the south, and that yellow area shows, what the expectation is for the more and more settlement of people in Grenada. Now, I'm a St. Patrick's person myself, and I have a little thing for St. Patrick's, but basically the data is saying that people are moving to the south, and from the south, people are also moving eastwards. And one of the things you can see as you look on Grenada's southeast coast is all of the bays that we have. And these are beautiful, unused beaches that lend themselves to things like retirement communities, to boutique hotels, to a whole range of other things. So as we think about the placement of a hospital, a teaching hospital, that'll have medical tourism connections, we need to think about where we place it in relation to these new population dynamics. Next slide, please. In terms of what we do with the old hospital is actually a beautiful site. Access is just not brilliant. And so thinking about how that can be repurposed would be critical, because you can then move from an asset that someone might value at 30, but when you come to do the transaction, people want to do it at 20 million. But if you have a plan around it, you can actually raise the value of that site significantly. And looking a little further afield, just a little further on, we have a cricket stadium, we have an athletic stadium, we don't yet have an Olympics swimming pool, but we could be thinking about a sports city with a whole range of sporting facilities. You can attract people, you can have a place for people to stay, a little bit of reclamation along the waterfront, you can have places for people to stay, so that people come to the sports city in Grenada for sport-related activity, but also for medically related sports activities as well. These are some of the things that we could give consideration to as we think about the development of Grenada. And finally, going the other side, around the old hospital site, think about how this relates to the overall blue economy. Our carenage and St. George's is unique in the Caribbean. We need to develop this in a way that's going to be sensitive tourism. So as we think about what we do with the old site, and think about the connectivity all the way through to the carenage. Irina Koska, next slide please. Irina Koska did some work thinking about how the carenage could become a cultural center. This is the orange economy, a cultural center with things like house of art, house for performance, for dance, for music, and so on. And then some work done by New York University also looked at another part, next slide please. Also looked at another part of St. George's and looked at how you actually prepare it for climate change. So if you could just jump 2 slides to the next one, because I just want to say something very quickly on this one. So this is some work done by NASA looking at how St. George's, next slide please. This is some work done by NASA at what would happen to St. George's over time. It looked at how storm surge affected the carenage, but it looked at sea level rise. And this was actually done by physically putting depth gauges and tide gauges into the carenage, measuring it over time, sending all of that data to NASA. NASA did the research, and they said, listen, here's where you're going to be at 2030, here where you're going to be at 2050, here where you're going to be at 2080. At 2080, most of the carenage is underwater, which is why we need to be thinking about that area anyway in terms of how we develop and preserve it. Next slide, please. And this is what the 2030 picture looks like. So the first one is, if you're by Rennick and Thompson over there, you can see how you're a little bit underwater. And the second one is if you're over by the post office, by the, I say the post office, you know what I mean, the old post office, the financial ministry building. This is where, sea level rise will take us. So an integrated plan around some of these things is going to be critical. So we don't just think about the medical tourism and the medical park, but we need to be thinking about what we do with the old hospital site and that entire carenage area. And finally, next slide, please. For knowledge tourism, we have a spot in Grandance where we have a trade center. It's not used all the time. We have an unused SGU site. And so I'm just going to walk over here to make sure everyone can see this. So what we're looking at here, this is Spiceland Mall here. This entire site here, this is where the trade center is, and it's actually adjacent to the SGU site. These 2 sites can be combined, potentially, to create a conferencing hotel, a knowledge center, and a place for performing arts. What it means is that all of the hotels in the area will benefit when you have events and so on, and this will actually help to build up the orange economy of Grenada. So, final 3 slides, Madam Chair. In making it happen, next slide, please. Next slide. We need to be thinking about national health insurance. how we can harness the Transformation Fund and CBI, repurposing the existing sites, and the merits of the SDG bond. And next slide, please. A previous speaker spoke about the importance of bringing together a public-private working group to start thinking about this. And what that working group could potentially do is do a mapping and analysis of the offshore medical industry, looking at the key sectors that would be and the key areas that would be relevant for Grenada, so the teaching hospital, medical tourism, nursing school, all of these things, conference tourism, wellness tourism, possibility of clinical trials, medicinal herbs, and blue biotechnology. On blue biotechnology, just to quickly let everybody know, the first successful treatment for HIV/AIDS actually comes from a Caribbean sea sponge found in Jamaica. So we have lots of things out in the sea as well that can be used. And next slide, please. Yes, now that's one. So we need to figure out what the priorities are going to be, what a sequencing might look like, what is the business analysis, so what revenues can be generated. I very much agree that we need to be thinking of the hospital not as a cost center, but as a profit center. So if you think about it for medical tourism, the same way we benefit from SGU, SGU largely serves people from abroad, but Grenadians benefit as well. I happen to be one of them. But many Grenadians have been through SGU. But if Grenada set out to do a university just for Grenada and for Grenadians, it may not have been a profitable proposition. So I very much agree with the analysis of my colleague on that one. The financing plan and work going back to the World Bank and the IFC, a lot of work's been done already on this teaching hospital idea and finding out from them, how can we, think about, how can we pick up from where we left off potentially. Next slide, please. And thank you all very much.
Thank you so very much, Dr. Friday. Really, really great presentation from both these gentlemen. Shape-shifting information, really and truly. So now we're about to have some shape-shifting discussions, and we turn it over to the audience, of course, our virtual audience, and those of you in-house with us for questions. The information is so rich that we really couldn't cut the panelists, and so, yeah, they had me doing a really long synopsis. But I'm going to cut my synopsis and I'll find a way to get what I need to get through to them, probably in the questions and so on. So in the interest of time, because we're working with time here, we're going to move directly to our questions. Those of you in the audience, we invite you to stand at the mic. Identify yourself. If you're representing an organization, you can do so as well, whoever you are, and ask your question of the panelists. Those of you online, please field your questions and they'll come in through me and I'll take care of those. So I'd like to I'll first invite those present with us in the audience here to field the first question. Go right ahead. The mic's right there. Yes. Thank you.
Good evening. Dr. Friday, great job, especially with the SDG bonds, which you mentioned there. I think it's absolutely fantastic. And this being something from the ECCB funded here, and I guess members of the ECCB could give better guidance to this. Has the ECCB actually even looked into something like that already, of creating a sort of bond structure where we can lead by example to others, especially seeing the SDG number, I think it's number 3 for health, in creating these sort of special bonds that we show others that if we are pushing in that direction, we can get lower interest loans for companies looking to promote medical tourism in this region, working with the ECCB. So I don't know who would be best to answer that, but yes, I would love to see that. Thanks.
Well, I think ECCB can answer that question, but let me just say one caveat, with bonds. First thing to say is that green bonds and blue bonds have just escalated. I think already in the last few years, I think $2.2 trillion worth of green bonds have actually been conducted, and we're expecting so climate-related finance and all that to get to. The hope is to get to 5 trillion, but it's looking like we have to get to at least about 4.2 trillion to meet the climate challenge. Now, as island states that are exposed to climate change, highly indebted, and so on, the thought of taking on more debt is always going to be, a difficult one. So, what has happened is that people are looking at bonds linked to debt swaps. So you do a debt swap, and you basically do a bond to cover the debt swap. So that is one way of sort of managing the difficult fiscal situation. Having said that, the key metric you're looking for into taking on debt is debt to GDP ratio. So if you can make the case that this debt is going to massively increase your GDP over time, then, and I think that case needs to be made, then I think more island states should be looking at some of these instruments. But this is after you've exhausted things like, highly concessional IDA funding, IDA finance, which you could get at 2% for the first, well, you've got 10-year moratorium, then 2% for year 10 to 20, and then 4% for year 20 to year 40. So you want to exhaust some of those, lower hanging fruit in terms of lower cost of capital first. But ECCB is in the room if they want to add to that. Okay.
All right, I'm sure Governor Antoine is watching, and the Deputy Governor as well. All right, so we'll revert on that one. Moving along, we have a question from the virtual audience. I'll just let you know, gentlemen, panelists, that you have received very high commendations from our online audience, so very well done. So here's a question, and that goes to you, Mr. Duncan, and you can chime in as well, Dr. Friday, as you see fit. There's a YouTube question. Isn't it really about attracting the right investors willing to build medical centers in Grenada? Other islands with this sector are being operated by private companies.
That is correct. I think if we look at anything that we have been massively successful at, we have not done it alone. So foreign direct investment is crucial if we are going to compete. And if we are going to ramp up quickly our involvement in medical tourism, there's no if but or perhaps. And that's why I made the point that once we map out how it is we are going to go forward, that we have to have a medical tourism association, and that's where the private sector get to shape and mold, what the future would look like. Government basically is to simply enable, incentivize, and regulate, but not participate to the extent that they would do a poor job. So that said, I agree with the caller.
Dr. Friday?
I think it's a great point, and I agree with all the points made by Mr. Duncan. Just to say that, if people are coming in to do, medical tourism, let's say something like plastic surgery. Plastic surgery should be relatively simple and straightforward. As private sector, you don't necessarily, however, want to invest in, things like an ICU. So it's important that you have some government investment, some facility, such as a teaching hospital that's very well equipped, where you have a set of services that people can fall back on. Because, if someone goes to, do something to their ears or, doctor makes a mistake. You need to have the backup medical facilities to support the worst case scenario. So it actually helps to have government investment and private sector investment as well.
Thank you very much. We'll field another question from our in-house audience. And that question is coming from our Minister of Finance, the Honorable Dennis Cornwall.
Okay.
Good evening, sir.
Good evening.
They've left you mic-less. On its way.
I'm repeating myself again. I think I must congratulate the both presenters for two very good presentations. The whole issue of medical tourism sounds exciting to us. And I believe that it does not only consist of building a brand new hospital for teaching purposes and other activity that we conduct in there. But I think surrounding that, one has to look at an integral situation whereby the other aspects of the infrastructure that needed to go along with it. Because currently we have a situation in the south where if you're traveling at 8 o'clock in the morning, it's congestion going down. You're coming up at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, it's congestion going on. So I believe that that teaching hospital should be also looking at twinning with it and upgrading the infrastructure throughout Grenada, Carriacou, and Petit-Martinique. That's the only way I think we can basically reach the level at which we can say, well, okay, we cater for our local medical issues as well as to offering that to our visitors to our island. I just wanted to comment on that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Minister.
Minister, you're absolutely correct. I mean, that is not lost on us at all. I think Dr. Friday did a good job when he looked at the aerial shots and how the population centers are emerging. So, and that's the thing about these industries. When you begin to build them out, they actually crowd in other activities that of necessity must take place for them to succeed. So, well said. And the investment will be bigger than just a hospital, to your point.
Another online question, gentlemen. How can Grenada leverage its medical university to provide the talent for medical tourism sector? Dr. Friday, that went right up your alley.
No, it's a great question. I think in the last 40 years, SU provided at least 5 scholarships per year, and I think it's really 5 scholarships per semester. So, it means you have, 200 to 400 Grenadian medical doctors who have been trained, and not necessarily, and they're not here in Grenada, but actually practicing in the United States and elsewhere. Meet them all the time in our international travel. So there are a lot of Grenadian doctors, including both my sisters, in fact. And I know many Grenadian doctors would love to come home, if they felt that there was an industry that they could plug into, people aren't looking to make the same sort of salaries that they would have had in the U.S., but, they don't necessarily want to come home and have almost no salary, either. So it needs to be a balance, and I think, to Mr. Duncan's earlier point about, if you're serving international patients, whose medical bills are being paid by insurance and so on, it allows you to have a pricing that can attract some of that talent back to Grenada.
Mr. Duncan?
No, I agree, Dr. Friday. I mean, we do a lot of talking on the island, and I think it's time for action. The question is, however, how do we... You see, and people don't have to return to Grenada permanently to serve. So I'm thinking, for example, you are a broker in the medical tourism business. You know the schedule of Dr. Tom Jones, when he does what types of surgery and so on, and he flies in, for those days and get the surgery done, and he flies back out. He does not have to live here permanently. I'm saying that air travel, information, communication technology allows for greater efficiency and effective delivery of service. So, for example, there are some procedures that you'll be able to, using technology, prep for before. By prep, I mean you could get all the images that you need to, situate how the surgery is going to be done and so forth. So, when the patient arrives, all that work is done, maybe even before he or she actually leaves his or her home country. So, I'm just saying that to say that, to me, the possibilities are great. But we have to rethink how we approach it. And to Dr. Friday's point, you don't have to be living here permanently to be part of the equation.
All right.
If I could just build on that very quickly. Actually, SGU used this model, to great effect. What SGU used to do is they actually brought in the authors of the medical texts. But the authors would not come in and spend the entire semester. They would actually just come in for 2 weeks, a very short period of time, deliver the lectures, in pulmonary physiology or cardiac physiology or whatever sector, and leave. You had some who were permanent, but you had the option of having the best lecturers to actually come to Grenada for a short period of time. And something like that could also work for both international doctors and doctors who are Grenadians living abroad.
Mm-hmm. How does our social, as we dovetail into how the blue, orange, and green economy, how they impact the medical tourism trust in terms of its prerequisites and prospects, the green economy, which really concentrates on improving, our well-being and social equity and so on, and significantly reducing, ecological shortages, environmental threats, pollution. I mean, to use local parlance, you know us. How? I mean, do you see that? Is that a threat? Are there opportunities? How do you think we can approach this as we explore this medical tourism thrust?
Well, in many ways, the green economy is very broad. I mean, from green economy, you're talking about everything from agriculture to renewable energy to electric vehicles. And so, if people are coming here because you have, some retirement communities, for example, they don't want to be paying the sort of rates that we pay for electricity, for example. So, being able to find ways to use renewable energy to reduce the amount of money that's leaving the country to pay for fossil fuels, I think is going to be very important. And the agricultural sector, there's a lot we could be doing in terms of herbal remedies. Dr. Pitt actually had in our days at IFC, actually had an entire catalog of all the bush people used to boil and what it was used for. But we need to go back. We need to look at all of that information that we have, and start to think about, how this could be part and parcel of of treatment related to the to medical tourism and the healthcare sector in general.
Okay, great. We get back to the online questions. Somebody mentioned, we talk a lot and there's no action. All talk, no action. Someone is asking, how do we move from talk to action? What are the critical next steps to move medical tourism forward? That is the question.
So basically, policy, right, is driven by the elected official. They make policy. Let's agree on that. So when Dr. Friday could point out that IFC, for instance, is disgruntled that the 2012 study has not been actioned, What does that tell you? That there is a lack of consistency in policy by virtue of the 5-year electoral cycle. My thesis is Grenada has a national sustainable development plan. Therefore, the political negotiation should be which of the two parties is best able, committed, and demonstrate their willingness to execute that policy or the plan. That's my view. And therefore, when you go to the National Sustainable Development Plan, you should, in my mind, be seeing in these manifestos the interpretation, articulation of that which the nation has agreed through an extensive process of consultation and the use of trained planners in producing. If you don't refer back to the plan and everybody wishful thinking right through, you'll continue to go around in circles, right? So to move from talk to action requires, to me, consistency and, of course, adequate resourcing of your endeavors, right? And you could only resource those endeavors adequately if you genuinely believe in executing what is in the plan as agreed by the population.
Dr. Friday?
Yeah, no, it's a great point, and I think a key word is consistency. So yes, we do have a national sustainable plan. You know, it'd be great if we could see that from administration to administration, parts of that actually get executed. Obviously, it'd be up to each administration to focus on their priorities as they see it. So that having that level of consistency, I think, is important. And one way you could do that, I think, is by creating a broad-based coalition, the sort that you were talking about, Mr. Duncan, with private sector and government. Get a broad-based coalition going and get them excited about the idea. Let's hear some of their ideas as well, so that this becomes something that is, you know, beyond the formal institutions, and we have you know, NGOs, private sector, and others really excited about this. The other point on consistency is that sometimes there are inconsistencies between the World Bank, the IFC, and parts of the IMF and so on. I just want to point it out because the World Bank did express concerns about that particular transaction. So the IFC wanted to do it. The World Bank said, listen, this is where you are now. You're going into an IMF program. We're not sure that this is the best thing for you to do at this particular point in time. And, you know, we've seen that we have seen those inconsistencies as well, you know, in those organizations related to other transactions that we've done in energy and other things. So I'll just leave it there. But, you know, those institutions are not always consistent across the board.
Right.
Just let me segue into Doc's point about the IFCs and the World Bank and the Caribbean Development Bank. I just want to list a few hotels in Grenada. Rock Gardens, Hamilton Inn, Mafeking, Flamboyant,
Mr. Duncan, these would sound foreign to so many people.
No problem. Cedars Inn. I could list about 12 hotels, Village Hotel, that no longer exists.
That's correct.
Why? Because CDB advised that small, locally owned properties, regardless as to where they are located, it seems, is what is being called for by visitors. Now, to a certain extent, we could say in the early 70s, with Liat or whoever landing 3 times, well, maybe twice, 3 times a day in Pearls, if Barbados allowed them to come in, you did not need, you know, big hotels. But with the advent of the international airport, there was no way that should have continued. So today we now have, you know, larger upscale hotels and so on. So the point I'm making is that you as a country, to me, have to, as I say, believe, conceive, and plan to achieve. You need the help, yes, but must not be that they are dictating, to me, the pace, tempo, and direction of your development. I mean,
Right.
they have made too many errors around the world, in my view, for people who have to end up paying the price for these errors not to be in the driver's seat sufficiently. Having, of course, trained your people over the years. Why did you send them to school anyway?
I like that. The temperature is building and the tempo is rising. We're getting closer. I have to keep the tempo as a moderator. We have 16 minutes to go, and we have quite a few questions here. But now we have a question from the in-house audience. We recognize Senator Roderick Sinclair. Your question, please.
Thank you so much, Madam Moderator, and I want to congratulate, of course, the ECCB on this achievement for all of us in the OECS, and of course, very good presentation and well-researched, mind invigorating by our two distinguished panelists. I want to make a few questions into my comments. The issue of implementation, and I was very happy to hear the reference to the Sustainable Development Plan for Grenada, because this is our benchmark to take us forward. And inside of it, specify the formation of some body that the Parliament should approve, such that all the implementation inside of that plan takes place. So that is significant. A little bias as it relates to the agriculture, and that's my zone. The issue of the medicinal herbs, and of course, our marijuana, which is also part of our 2035 plan, and it fits into all of this, our significance. I'm seeing the whole issue of medical tourism, not necessarily a hospital, but all the connecting parts. So whether it's for rehabilitation, this knowledge, the technology, and we look at an industry where different players within the whole private sector, both locally and overseas, can play a part. So government should be looking at how do we establish some regulatory framework to incentivize various investors. So maybe you could have, whether it's for rehab, sports rehabilitation, and all those ideas. The issue of therapy using music and art and craft, all of those. So sometime maybe in moving forward, we may need to find those sort of niche that is not necessarily broad-based, but of course still rely on the SGU, which can be partnering within that space and not necessarily look to go and build a hospital when we might have higher revenue-based monies that we can make from those sort of niche opportunities. So this is what I want to share. The issue of going and use our beaches and swimming for rehabilitation. So I think we need to look at that. How do we, and my good friend Minister Cornwall raised the point about the issue of travel and congestion. But how do we decentralize the therapy into the farms, picking fruits and relaxing in the fresh air in St. Patrick's? So I think we need to, in that conversation that will take place, we need to look at that in those spaces. So this is my sharing I wanted to contribute in this. Thank you.
Thank you. Gentlemen, 30 seconds, so we move to the next question.
I very much agree with that. We need to be thinking about this in a very broad-based way, yes, we could be talking about a teaching hospital and the medical tourism that will go on, but I think, and I hope one of the points I made is that we need to be thinking about the health and wellness, broadly, and how that spills into agriculture, agricultural tourism, and all of those things. And it helps if we have some policies that will support it. And also perhaps if we do something with, let's say, the Grenada Development Bank, for example, so that people wanting to move into those areas. And just one other thing to say, I was so excited with the creative industry meeting that was held here. It's about saying, this is what we're doing. This is what Grenada is going to be doing, putting yourself out there and making a stamp. And I think we need to be thinking about the same thing in the healthcare space as well. So it's great that we have that headline that Grenada will be a sort of health center in the region. But to Mr. Duncan's research, if this is when you do a word search, if this is only coming up in a few places, then we don't have it. You know, this should be built into all of the speeches, the policies that the GDB have in terms of what they're going to be investing in. You know, all of those things need to be joined up. Let me just make one more point. I feel privileged to be able to work in places like the Maldives, Fiji, Micronesia, Bermuda, and so on with the Waite Institute. And we advise them, we say, listen, you need to have a narrative that you can go out there with internationally. That narrative needs to make sense to private investors internationally. It needs to make sense to institutional investors. It needs to make sense to private sector and NGOs, you know, on the ground as well. So to your point, I think having this sort of broad-based coalition, getting people excited about it, and getting that making the narrative, getting it out there, and doing something like the creative economy, you know, annual meeting. I hope it's going to happen annually. You know, that would be a way of
Thank you.
making sure people understand it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. We're waxing warm. YouTube question for you, Mr. Duncan. How could CBI drive investment in medical tourism?
Okay, so CBI is an investor-driven program. By this I mean, if an investor has a project, he could take it to the CBI, it will be assessed and, you know, can be approved. I think what people are asking is why it is all the projects so far seem to have been in one sector. I cannot see why, but what I do argue is that the viability of the Mos Bishop International Airport, to me, is only being heavily secured now that we have sufficient quality rooms on the island, and still you need additional rooms. So I don't think there's any harm. However, I think we need to shift gears along the way, whereby the government of Grenada should determine the sectors in which it wishes to invite investors to participate. So if it's medical tourism, for example, if that's determined to be the area, then the types of investment or projects that you want to see there should be invited, and get investors to build out those projects which you would evaluate and look to fund.
Thank
So
you.
That's the best answer I could give you.
Thank you so much. Dr. Friday, straight to you. You mentioned conference tourism and building a hotel and conference area in Grand Anse. Is that an alternative or priority area over a medical tourism, or do we see the both areas working together?
I think this is part of the knowledge economy, the orange economy. You know, it's about taking a broader based approach. With conferencing tourism, for example, you can have, you know, plane loads of people coming to Grenada in the off season. And what will happen is that if you have these conferences in sectors that you have a particular interest, like, you know, in health and wellness, for example, the more professionals you get coming to Grenada to have a conference in that sector, the more interactions they're going to have with Grenadians. There's a chance that some will stay and invest. So, you know, identifying a few key sectors, be it medicine and healthcare, be it the creative economy, green economy, blue economy, identifying a few of those things and saying, listen, we're going to be making a push in these areas to bring people in Grenada to discuss some of these things, so that Grenada actually helps to set the agenda. Because when you're hosting some of these conferences as well, you know, you have a part to play in setting the agenda. So I see it as just being very holistic. It's not either or, but
Right.
we do need to look at how we prioritize and sequence.
All right.
our
You mentioned
systems.
harmonize a lot in your presentation. So harmonize, right?
That's a good word to use.
Right. Getting to Grenada from the region is expensive and may be prohibitive to accessing the medical tourism services. How will that be addressed? Sir Duncan?
Distracted, pardon me, can you repeat?
The question is, getting to Grenada from the region is expensive and it may be prohibitive to accessing the medical tourism services. How will that be addressed?
Okay, I think the Prime Minister of Grenada, Honorable Deacon Mitchell, is on record as saying that he is committed to solving the regional, inter-regional air travel. I think that commitment has been demonstrated already in the support given for, I think it's Inter-Caribbean. And I believe that once enough of the OECS leaders get on board, regional travel will, I wouldn't say return to the good old days, but will eventually be resolved. Very costly, in my view, but I see no other way but collective, engagement among all the leaders to get the problem resolved.
Right. As we have you up in your presentation, in the prerequisites, you mentioned certification and accreditation, and also the will of the government and so on. What do you think in terms of priority for us addressing and getting to the point of the prerequisite and action on medical tourism? How do we position those?
That's an unfair question.
Why?
In other words, I'm just saying I'm not an expert in the field, right? If you ask me for my opinion in that regard, I think accreditation is critical because no one would come to your hospital if it is not, accredited.
Right.
I mean,
Speaks to quality.
It speaks to that. So I'll give that number one. So as you are designing and building, you want to make sure that you are meeting the requirements of the accreditation board so that when the project is completed and the programs are built out, accreditation should not be a big delay between commissioning the facility and being able to bring in your clients, so to speak. So I'll give that top priority. Of course, the legislation and all those stuff can be quote unquote adopted or borrowed from other Commonwealth countries such as India, that has a British, jurisprudence, and these things can be put in place even before you begin to turn the sod in the new hospital. So, yeah.
Great answer. It wasn't so unfair after all, was it? Dr. Friday, recently I read online that Grenada was named among 13 countries in the world, 13 countries in the world with clean air. How do we hang on to that sort of thing and build it into our messaging and our branding, if you will, to get it to help build the medical tourism and all the things that we're offering to the world?
I'm so glad you mentioned that because actually did a white paper for this for this lecture series, and we picked up on that point on the on this positioning for Grenada. These are things that you hold on to and you run with it when you get it. You can't sit around and say, well, let's see what drops out at the end. I mean, this is a gold mine to have something like that. So I think this is a core part of the narrative and the messaging that needs to be around, Grenada as this this healthy island. We need to make the most of it. We also need to be thinking about what we do to build on that. So we spoke about earlier on the policy of moving to electric vehicles. It'll take time, but if the policy signal alone of saying over the next 20 years we're going to phase out fossil fuels, that will also help in terms of having clean air. It's great to see the work that's being done now in terms of pollution on the side of the road. All of those things I think are important. When people come to Grenada, they hear that, we have clean air, golden Chelsea flower show, but when you arrive in Grenada and you drive on the road, you're not really seeing that. So we need to take these accolades and build on it, let people actually see it when they come.
Absolutely. Just as you're on that, before we take the viewer question, as we mentioned, the clean air and as a selling point for the island, I think how does the doctors, the most doctors per capita in the U.S. system coming from St. George's University, what do we do with that, Mr. Duncan? How should that look? How should that shape our medical tourism thrust?
Okay, so just let's go back to the goal in Chelsea. Having one goal, if anybody asks us for a 20-foot container load of anthurium lilies or any other flowers we have in that day, we can't ship it out. So I'm saying doing these things to me are great. The question of monetizing and really have us create wealth, as we like to say, we need to take it, to that point. Now let's come back to SGU, and it's the same thing because we have not thought through how do we build out, to use the ecosystem to capitalize? And I'll tell you, if other islands had SGU with its brand, its size, and its reach on their island, trust me, it will be a different outcome. So I'm saying that I do not have all the answers, but enough talk has gone on, and I think it's time that we sit down, to Dr. Friday's point, and have a national conversation with professionals and people who know what needs to be done, agree that it needs to be done, and then decide how it is going to be done. I do not have the answers, but I just want to put those few comments in play.
You light the candle. Thanks. Dr. Friday?
Yeah, no, just if you go to the SGU alumni website, they claim to have the largest alumni in the world. Now, we'll have to look into those numbers. But I think this kind of builds on the idea that, it's the largest number of doctors practicing in the United States. That alumni organization is a great starting point for, finding doctors who would want to come back and serve, even if it's for a short period of time. Having been there myself, one of my medical school colleagues contacted me and said, she'd like to come down to Grenada and do something. So you have that happening. We can tap into that large alumni association to help build out this idea, and to have a roster of experts who are willing to come in. So when you go to the banks and say, listen, here's what we want to do, you could say, listen, for our cardiology department, here are some of the names we're going to have. Here's some of the names we're going to have for nephrology and so on.
Right. Thank you, Dr. Friday.
Yes.
We have an audience question.
Yes.
Good evening, sir.
Yes, good evening.
Thanks for holding for us.
That's fine. I have listened attentively, and I will not go through again the goodness and the depth of the presentations. It seems to me, though, that we have identified what we would like to do, and we've gone on to dealing with some of the pros and cons. But in terms of sequencing, I would like us to take our mind back to the point where I think it was Mr. Duncan who suggested, and he used the concept of consistency. Mm-hmm. I would like us to consider, how do we get to deal with the first stage of that process and to insulate it from changes in the political directorate. I would like to know how we would do that, because that seems to me to be the bigger problem outside of our just dealing with some of the pros and cons, the goods and the bads and so on. So I would like us to focus on that, because that to me is the first stage in the sequence.
Right.
Thanks.
How do we address the fork in the road?
Well, I mean, big question. I think, as I said before, if it is situated in a National Sustainable Development Plan, right, which is the output of massive widespread consultation across sectors and political parties, then Grenada agrees that this is the plan to take us to the future. The parties contest for who is better able to do the job at any one point in time, and that's fine. In terms of the specific intervention, I believe that you have to your point, institutionalize it. So if you have a medical tourism commission, which is enshrined in law, you have a board of directors, you have, trained staff, you get consultancy from the World Bank, from friendly governments and so on, and you begin to hammer away at building this thing out. That's my view. In fact, you got to identify down the stream how many of what types of people you have to send and train. So kids are going off to university knowing that they'll be working as a broker, as a webmaster, or whatever, because there are endless spin-off and activities in the ecosystem for medical tourism. People could go and study tour to India and those kind of places to learn. But that is if you, first of all, believe, then you conceive, and you plan to achieve. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Dr. Decima Williams, the President of the Senate, she's at the mic. Just so you know, those of you viewing and listening from over the Caribbean, this is a woman of great vintage in the fight for the preservation of the climate.
Thank you. May I clarify that I'm speaking in my own personal capacity?
But of course you are. but we just had to let them know who you were.
Thank you. Good afternoon and congratulations to ECCB and to the presenters. I think it's really an exciting event. I'm sorry there isn't a woman on the panel to add that gender balance. There is a moderator, yes, who's giving good leadership to it, but I think we want the intellectual contribution of some of the thinking women as well. I agree so much with the panelists that the global economic and developmental model is rapidly changing. And we are now moving away from our silos. So it's not just the orange economy or agriculture or blue, but in fact, in the SDG plan in Grenada and worldwide, we see the convergence of many of these various sectors, some old and some new. And I'm really excited that we here in Grenada are taking that on board. I do think we have to tweak whatever it is we do for at least, with at least two considerations in mind. One is equity, and the other one is sort of ramping up safeguards. So on the equity point, I think we could think in terms of not letting sectors or segments of the society fall off. The rural sector is being rapidly depopulated. Even school children are coming to school down here now. But in addition to depopulation, it is also being, the economy is falling off dramatically in some of the rural sectors. So that safeguard needs to be managed. I think also in the particular case of medical tourism, it's not talked about, but there are small countries or weak economies where poverty is so rampant that medical tourism has been taking brutal advantage of that. I could think of Haiti, where people are encouraged to sell blood, or other societies where people are, kidnapped and their organs removed for wealthier clients who come. So I think some of those safeguards need to be known and sort of talked about at the policy level. As regards equity, I think we in Grenada, I don't have the figure in front of me, and again, I'm speaking in my personal capacity, but I know that as our wealth has really gone up in this country. The middle class is really in formation in a way that it wasn't 20, 40 years ago. But so have also the inequalities in the society. We have really widening inequality with increasing economic activity. And so I wonder if the speakers would now or later think about adding those two concerns to your conversation. Safeguards, even in terms of wealth creation and not just jobs, and equity in terms of the rising inequality in our societies. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Gentlemen?
Well, I'll dive into it, and let me thank Dr. Williams for those very important comments. And I think the first thing to say is that urbanization is just one of those tragedies, I think, of our modern era. As of a few years ago, I think more than 50% of the global population actually now live in an urban area. So in Grenada, it's something we have to be mindful of, we have to prepare for. And I think you could see from, probably just after the revolution, people started coming down to St. George's, and you have, there's a housing problem, in St. George's that's been created. And so that, I think, is one of the areas where, from a policy intervention point of view, how you receive, how you deal with that, I think, is going to be important. The second thing to say is that in each of the parishes, there are comparative advantages which need to be built upon. St. Andrews, we have the agricultural center there. There's more than one agricultural center actually in St. Andrews. So Can we look at St. Andrews as the agricultural capital and have a school for agri-technology and take it to the next level, not just have a school and train people and do capacity building, but actually have financing that can help people to set up companies and so on. In Guelph, we've been talking about Guelph as a fishing center, for a long time, but what has happened over time is more and more of the fishing boats, particularly the longliners, are basically locating in St. George's now and in the south. So there are things that can be done to bring fisheries back to Guelph, for example, or elsewhere, on the cove that need to be looked at. St. David's is, with all the beaches and so excellent for retirement communities, for boutique tourism and so on. So we can have a plan, I think, for each parish to look at, what are they good at? In Carriacou you have the boat building, but that's something we're almost allowing it to die. So you need to have policies that look at some of these comparative advantages, says yes, we can make an industry out of this in this particular location, and invest to help make that happen. Very, very good points, and thanks for raising them.
Thank you, Dr. Friday. Mr. Duncan, you want to address the equity question?
No, I'm a believer in giving people a fair chance. And anything that we do, the policies that we put in place must ensure that people have, a fair shot at whatever opportunities there are. They must not be discriminated against based on, gender or, in our instance, political allegiance or perceived political allegiance, and let people, rise to their potential and help build Grenada. So that will be my take on any industry that we seek to build out. The question of the drift to the south, it's natural and obvious. Once you build international airport, you build a frequent industrial estate, and hotels started going up. These centers have to be populated because the workers have to come to work. You had no choice. The question is, you had with that simultaneously the collapse of the agricultural sector, and precious little has been done to transfer, as it were, resources from tourism and industrial development to buttress agriculture. If you can reverse that, then there will be, to me, a stymieing of the drift. And then there's a question of development. So now that you have Six Senses and Range and Intercontinental, two big hotels drifting into St. David's, you would likely see fewer and fewer people leaving. Well, you'll see people leaving St. George's and going to find work in St. David's. I think that is going to be a reverse flow. If and when the project in Sauterre succeeds, then you'll also have that. So I think that there's a rebalancing of development on the island, and that augurs well, I would say, in the next 10-15 years for curbing the drift that we have seen, since, let's say, 83 to now.
Right. We have drifted over time because the conversation has been so riveting. We now gone past close-off time by 14 minutes, but I'll just take one more question from online before I allow you gentlemen for your closing. And that is, the absence of physical planning presents a threat to economic transformation by unplanned internal migration. The Montrouge Ridge is now being penetrated by the expansion of slums. Does the panel appreciate this threat, and what immediate steps can or should be taken to arrest this development?
I'll jump on that one actually first, because it's something that I've noticed as well, and I think it's it's an opportunity to think about the urbanization challenge that we've just been talking about. So if people have to come to St. George's to find work, and there's land somewhere that they feel that they can put up something to a shelter, people will do so in the absence of policies to properly house people, and in the absence of policies as it relates to squatting. Now, it's very difficult, which government is going to go up on the Montrouge Hill and say to folks, listen, we've got to, I'm sorry, but, we can't have a slum coming down that hill onto Grandance Beach. And by the way, that is what will happen if it's not addressed. So two things need to happen. One is we do need to think about the housing challenge and how we deal with that you know, from Monroe Hill, the Limes, you know, Grand Anse Valley, because people need to have proper infrastructure and all of these things. So if you just allow it to happen, and then you see Grenada puts up a pole for electricity, people become more settled. So there needs to be a policy around that, and I think, you know, physical planning needs to, I think, be properly institutionalized, not just look at, well, you know, when you come with a plan, is the beam, what size is the beam and the joist and all of these things. It needs to be, are you building in the right zone to start with? You know, so all of these things, you know, have proper zoning for where things should be. That's going to be important, and it needs to be given a level of authority where they understand the, you know, the imperative, I think, of any political party would want to see things happen quickly, but it needs to happen in such a way that fits in with an overall plan. So.
Thank you, Dr. Friday. Mr. Duncan, you want to chime in?
I know for sure that I cannot go and build on Monroe's Ridge. I'll be moved the next morning. So the people who go there, right, seem to have certain immunities and so on. It's all part of the political negotiating process. And I'm not too sure if the lands they are on are all government lands. And I don't think we should encourage people to invest in property that will never become their own, or it's difficult to become their own. So to Doc's point, to be proactive in solving the housing problem, I think is the main role for government, rather than running after the folks after they have squatted. And squatters have been rewarded over the years. I know reward is the right word, but people go on to land and eventually government cuts it up and give them proper title for purchase. And to me, you want to be proactive in doing that. If you have state lands, crown lands, you might have it earmarked for certain purposes. Housing should be one of them, and you should be proactive in cutting them up into lot sizes and distributing them by whatever mechanism you deem to be fair and objective.
Thank you so very much. Gentlemen, at this time, thank you everyone for your questions, those of you in the audience particularly. Thank you so very much. And your audience online, the questions are still coming. They're really great questions. I even had a few. Just managed to slip 2 in, but that's okay. Thank you so very much. So we'll now take your, and we'll invite rather, your closing comments. Dr. Friday?
Well, I think so much has been said. It's really just to say thank you. You know, thank you to the ECCB for putting this together. Thank you for all the questions that we've had from in-house, and thank you to all the folks, you know, out there who've been sending in questions and listening in. It's great to have this type of dialogue, and it would be great to see more of this dialogue happening with a view to you know, to action. So thank you all, and my thanks to Mr. Duncan and to yourself, Madam Chair, for an excellent session. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Duncan?
Yes, so I also want to add my words of thanks to everyone. I think the main message I want to leave is that let us, you know, believe, conceive, and plan to achieve. In terms of the next steps, I always wonder, you know, when the cameras stop rolling, the lights are off, and the doors are closed, what happens next? So, Central Bank might have chosen this topic knowing full well that Grenada has the potential, because I looked at the other topics in other islands and they seem to be well thought out. It's not just intellectual. So the question is, again, in a couple of minutes, the lights are off, the doors are closed, cameras stop rolling. What happens next?
Thank you so very much. What happens next is a vote of thanks. And we'd like to really, really thank the ECCB. We'd like to thank Governor General, Her Excellency Dame Cecile Lagrenade, GCMG, OBE, PhD. Thank you so very much for coming, staying through, and being a very interested partner in this. We'd like to thank the Honorable Dennis Cornwall, Minister of Finance, and an ECCB Monetary Council member. Thank you so much, sir, and thanks for participating as well. Members of Parliament who were with us throughout the Eastern Caribbean Currency Union, Dr. Decima Williams, President of the Senate, thank you, and thank you for your intervention. Appreciate it. And the governor, the deputy governor, and all the officials of the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank, thank you so very much. Our former finance minister, Mr. Gregory Bowen, he was here with us earlier. We thank you so very much for coming, Mr. Bowen. All senior government officials, we thank you. The representatives from the financial sector, thanks a whole lot. We'd like to especially thank ECCB, Mrs. Linda Felix Berkeley, the country manager, and Ms. Valine Street. Thank you guys so very much. You make the work of 20. You make the work of 2 look like the work of 20. Thank you so very much, ladies. And the ECCB technical team, led by Mr. Marlon Bristol, thank you so very much, guys, and all of you who have been working with me online. Appreciate it. Grenada Broadcasting Network, thank you so much, GBN. TNR Communications, a hearty thank you to Richie Oliver and his team for carrying this with precision and quality. The Radisson Resort, we thank you for hosting us this evening. And Father, we thank you, Father Marcin. Thank you so very much. Appreciate it. And thank you for staying all the way through. You blessed us and you stayed all the way through. We appreciate that. Great to hear that it was interesting to listen. And to these Grenadian sons of revered excellence, let's just hear it for them. Mr. Richard W. Duncan, OBE, and Dr. Angus Friday, our deepest gratitude and eternal thanks for your sterling contributions. We really appreciate it. And Dr. Friday, he posited this, going to leave you with this. Think of the hospital as a profit center, not a cost center. And Richard Duncan advanced, we can do it if we believe, conceive, and plan to achieve. But first, what's our ambition? That is a question I leave you with to ponder, and the answer may spark the requisite action. But we forge ahead. From the Radisson Resort on the world-famous Grand Dance Beach in St. George's, Grenada, we thank you so very much. I am Brenda Batiste. So long.